Hello everyone, and welcome to a preview of the Illinois Fighting Illini. So in the last video we looked at Rutgers, and in this one we'll continue with the Big Ten teams. I kind of went with these first three. I went with who's playing, who plays first. But then after that I could probably just go off of not only projections, but also if you guys have any suggestions on who you want next out of the Big Ten, I can do that, as well as I can just kind of go through the list of whatever. And yeah, but either way, let's look at Illinois. So obviously their main goal this year is going to kind of get back to their winning ways. Last year was kind of a dip after a really good season in 2022. They finished 8-5 and ended up going to a bowl, being on the fringe of making a Big Ten title game appearance. Obviously, Purdue ended up losing out to Purdue in 2022. But then last season they went 5-7, didn't go to a bowl game, and kind of took a step back. And that happens a lot when you lose a defensive coordinator, especially one that put a couple of their key, really good corners into the NFL and rebuilding and kind of, some other things. But either way, now let's look at kind of their, let's look at Illinois. Let's look at their head coach. Brett Bielema, he is going into his 16th season, fourth at Illinois. He has an overall record of 115-77. And so far as Illinois' head coach, he has a record of 18-19. And again, he's entering his fourth season, so that's 3 seasons of coaching. So far for Illinois. But now let's go ahead and look at the key players for Illinois. Luke Allmeyer is going to be most likely going to be their starting quarterback. He is a transfer from Ole Miss last year. He did play for Illinois. He had a completion percentage of 64.8. He threw for 1,883 yards, 13 touchdowns, and 10 interceptions. He also had 282 yards and 3 touchdowns on the ground. At running back, Caden Fagan and Josh McCray are their 2 backs entering this season. Fagan last year had 95 carries for 438 yards and 2 touchdowns. Meanwhile, McCray had 43 carries for 156 yards and 2 touchdowns. And McCray is kind of an interesting case because he didn't really get too many carries, but I remember him as a true freshman. They played Purdue, and he ended up getting almost 150 yards rushing or something like that. It was insane. So obviously he does have the potential to kind of go off and play a good game. But either way, let's look at wide receiver. So the top 2 guys are projected to be Patrick Bryant and Malik Easley. Bryant had 43 receptions for 560 yards and 7 touchdowns last year. Meanwhile, Easley really didn't get too many touches. He had 5 receptions for 50 yards and a touchdown last season. At tight end, their top guy is Cole Rusk. He is a transfer from Murray State, where he had 39 receptions for 512 yards and 6 touchdowns last season. On offense, Phil Steele's computers, which again is where I'm getting the projected starting lineups and the projected stats. But either way, they're projected to have average about 26.9 points of total offense per game, or total offense on offense a game, not total offense. Yeah. But yeah, let's look at their defense now. So on defense, their top returning tackler is Dylan Rosnack, who had 82 tackles last year. Miles Scott and Xavier Scott are their 2 guys who lead the team in kind of their returning with 2 interceptions apiece. They are not related. I did look that up because I wondered, but no, they are not related, although they have the same last name. Seth Coleman is the guy who they bring back with the most sacks. He had 6 last year. Defensively, the Illini are projected to give up 28.9 points and 369.6 yards of total offense per game. But now let's go ahead. Now that we've kind of looked at how the team how they're projected to play, let's look at their schedule. So obviously, this schedule, being in the Big Ten, it's not going to be easy, but let's go through it. So they get to kick off the season on August 29th. It will be a tune-up game against Eastern Illinois. Eastern Illinois does end up every once in a while having an NFL quarterback on their team, but from what I don't think that's the case this time. But either way, it should be a good tune-up game for Illinois, because on September 7th, the Kansas Jayhawks come to town, and this should be a really good kind of measuring stick game for Illinois. It'll be a good chance to see, okay, what Illinois team is this? Is it the Illinois team we saw 2 years ago, who, in that kind of game against what should be in Kansas a top 25 team, or at least a fringe top 25 team? Again, they bring back a lot of guys who are very good, so they should be a top 25 team, but this will be a good measuring stick game for Illinois. Are they closer to that, or are they back to, kind of just to scraping, and they're lucky to get to 6 wins? So we'll see if they can kind of turn that corner and get back to playing more like they did in 2022. But then next on September 14th, the Central Michigan Chippewas come to town. And although Central Michigan has over the years given some teams some scares and beaten some Big Ten and Big 12 opponents, They really haven't done that too much lately, so Illinois, as long as they play decent football, should end up coming out with a win in this one. Then on September 21st, they get to travel to Lincoln to play Nebraska. This should be a good game. Again, these two teams are going to, it's an early season. These two teams need this game. Both of them do. It's a 50-50 game, and yeah, it's winnable for both teams, so this will be a game that both of them are going to need to win a couple of these type of games that they're going to get to bowl games. Then the next week, they get to go on a trip out east to play to Happy Valley to play the Penn State Nittany Lions. Obviously, this one is going to be a tough one for them. Obviously, Penn State most likely will be a team that's on the, this will be a team that'll be competing probably late in the year to maybe see if they can get into a playoff spot. So, obviously, it'll be a tough one for Illinois. They do get a bye week after that. Then they get to play Purdue at home for the Cannon. Obviously, this should be off a bye. This should be an easier game in the schedule. Obviously, a rivalry game is never easy, and yeah, Purdue's kind of played well on this series for the last couple of years. But either way, but now the schedule continues to kind of get hard. Obviously, Penn State being there, then you kind of get a slight break with Purdue. Again, a rivalry game, so a tough one. But then they get to host the defending champs Michigan, October 19th. This one should be a tough, obviously it'll be a tough game, and not much needs to be said about that. It's defending champs. And although Michigan may not be what they were last year, it'll still be probably a tough game. And then the next game, well, guess what? They get to go on the road to Eugene and play Oregon. There is some question marks about Oregon, obviously losing Bo Nix, but my guess is that they'll reload and be a top 20 team at least, if not, a team competing for a, playoff spot. Then on November 2nd, they return home to play Minnesota, and what again, as I will kind of say, and I'm so blue in the face, because you'll hear it again in the Minnesota video, this one for both these teams is going to be one of those games where both teams need it. It's going to be a game where if both these teams will be fighting for a bowl game, this one's a game you got to win if you're going to get there. After a bye week after that, they get to host the Spartans for Senior Day. This one will depend a lot, kind of the way I said that Rutgers, on how well Jonathan Smith does in his first year of being the head coach for Michigan State. Obviously, he did a great job with that Oregon State team, so I bet he'll do the same for Michigan State, but how good will he be in his first year? That doesn't necessarily reflect on how great of a coach he is. That just depends on what's left in the cupboard from the last guy and what he could do in the transfer portal. But then they get to play Rutgers on November 23rd as they travel to Piscataway in another game where it's one of those 50-50, gotta win a couple of these to get to a bowl game. And then they wrap up their regular season schedule with the battle for the Land of Lincoln Trophy against the Northwestern Wildcats. This one should be an exciting game as it's being played in Wrigley Field. I always like these games. It's kind of interesting to see football played at Wrigley, where obviously it's not necessarily usually a football stadium, but obviously for many years it was with the Bears and them playing on it. So it'll be an interesting game. Plus, you get the two teams that really should be playing a game on it, the two Illinois, Chicago area team. I wouldn't say Chicago area, but Champaign's not that far away from Chicago. But either way, two teams that aren't that far away from Chicago. Probably most of their fans most of these people live in Chicago who are college football fans. Probably most of them are going to be either Illinois or Northwestern fans. Getting them to play in that place is kind of cool. So, and again, for both these teams, it could be another shot. It could be a win and you're in a bowl game, lose and you're going home situation. But anyway, guys, thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next video.